Hi, I'm Tom Liam Lynch. I'm a professor of education technology at Pace University, and this brief presentation is called Seeing Red, High and Low Tech Methods for Giving Better Feedback to Student Writing. I could almost include there in parentheses too, while also making it engaging and less work for teachers. And so hopefully with some of these techniques and some of the ideas here will be of use to different teachers in different settings. Before going any further, I'd recommend pausing the video and take a few minutes to just think about your use of feedback as a teacher, right? Um, Tell us, your colleagues, whomever, if you're doing this alone, but just jot down a little bit like a short story, even just like a paragraph of a time when you gave feedback to students or to a student that you thought was especially effective or ineffective. Take just a few minutes and think about a very concrete, specific experience, and then we'll keep going. Great. Now, as we think about assessment and feedback today, there are a few questions that kind of come to mind. And if you click on the link that you should see there on your screen, there's a helpful video by Stephen Colbert that kind of makes some light of this. But there's also, as often with Colbert, there's also a serious message at play, right? But what is the current state of assessment and feedback in the U.S.? What kind of assessment is valued, and what kind of feedback do you think most benefits your students? I mean, one thing that is pretty undeniable is that the role of assessment and data in the last dozen years, if not a bit more, has dramatically increased, right? So we almost feel like we're assessing students all the time. What kinds of assessments we're giving, whether or not those are meaningful to us, to our students, are really, really important questions. There's also an effect too of what's often referred to as washback, or as Nadia Bahizadeh talks about in some of her work. She's a researcher on writing, and especially writing assessment. She talks about the negative washback that like large scale assessments have on pedagogy, which is to say that what gets assessed gets taught. And so depending on the quality of those assessments, it has a direct impact on the quality of pedagogy or the quality of instruction. Um, After you've checked out the Colbert video, if that's your style, then you might find that this conceptual framing to be useful, right? So the way in which I think about assessment is I think about the interplay between assignment details, an assessment rubric, classroom practice, and peer self and teacher feedback cycles. And these kind of four elements are always intertwined and working. But what can happen sometimes is that we come up with an assignment, and then we give it to our students, but then the rubric we're using to actually assess the assignment isn't exactly aligned or mapped. Or the kinds of feedback that we're giving in different sorts of cycles, whether it's from self-assessment, peer, teacher, those don't necessarily align with what's actually being has been assigned or is in the rubric, and maybe none of that's aligned to what's been taught. So paying attention to the ways in which these different elements interplay is really, really, really important. In addition, it's important to think too about creating assignments for students that have authentic purpose, that are of authentic genres, and that have an authentic audience. We've all kind of experienced giving, the typical 5-paragraph essay. The 5-paragraph essay only exists on school tests, and students often will kind of treat it as such, and we have to question, like, is that, what am I really achieving if a student can do that? Am I preparing them for a test? Well, then maybe that has its own value. But if that's the only way that we're teaching our students to write, and the only reason we're teaching them to write, then I would argue we're missing something very, very important. So what does the research say? Just as a quick overview, that teachers should consciously align comments with classroom practice and intentionally provide feedback on both content and form of writing. And I'll show you some ways to do that in a little bit. Students need to know they're receiving and acting on feedback as part of an authentic writing process, so that the feedback should be coming more frequently, and it should be far less about doing this like one shot essay for a teacher, and it should be more about submitting their best attempt, getting some constructive feedback from different sources, and then trying again. Feedback must be specific and clear. You want to weave feedback processes into classroom instruction via things like workshops and conferences. And then you want to honor alternative modes of feedback, including multimodal forms and other socioculturally relevant means. And we'll get to that in a moment. So there are 4 strategies that I want to share very briefly. One is called color coding, one I call marginalia, another screencast tutorials, and then another one I call feedback loops. So color coding refers to this. When you give an assignment to students, typically what you collect at the end, or what teachers collect, is they collect this, like they collect a final polished draft of something. And I understand why. However, we're actually missing a really useful kind of teaching opportunity, and we're missing an opportunity to make assessing student writing faster. So what I would recommend trying is what I call color coding, which is where you ask students to color code their writing before submitting it for feedback. And you assign colors to several important requirements from the assignment that you wish to see, both content and form. So if you've asked students, for example, to make sure you include a thesis statement and include a quotation from the text, before they submit it to you, you ask them to color code in a specific color where they've done that. What you're doing is providing an opportunity for students to both kind of acknowledge and own where they did something and to show you that they know they did it well. And at the same time, you're making it much faster for you on the assessment end of things, on the feedback end, to check the box to make sure that they did something, and then you can focus on giving some more, some more perhaps useful and constructive feedback. Another strategy you might want to try is called screencasts. I call them screencast tutorials. So rather than telling students how to improve their writing, show them with skill-specific video tutorials. Ask students to submit a video presentation of their writing with a traditional paper, or structure a year-long project where students create writing video tutorials for each other. There's an awesome example of this in math done by, I think, 7th graders in California called mathtrain.tv. But the idea that is, for example, is that rather than just telling students, for instance, that, you misused your comma here, create a screencast. You could use things like, I think there's ScreenJelly, Screencast-O-Matic, Jing, QuickTime actually has screencast ability to functionality built into it. But show them in their writing, if you're getting a digital sample of their writing, for example, show them what it means to actually change the sentence, to go to thesaurus.com and plug in another word. And then the feedback you send them isn't writing, you're sending them a link where they can see you working with their writing. You can also ask them whenever they submit papers, you could ask students to give me a quick tour of your paper, walk me through real quick what you did and why, show me where you did the things that I've asked you to do, so that when you're assessing student work, you're doing more of kind of watching videos of students talking about their work, and then the time that you spend in their actual writing giving feedback is much, much, much more targeted. Marginalia refers to using the margins of a physical paper to structure your feedback as well as peer feedback. So, for example, if you have something like this sample of student writing here, you might use the left margin to ask students to comment on content, and then the right margin to comment on form, right? Or you might pose questions in the left margin and statements or exclamations in the right margin. Or if you have students doing peer feedback, you might have them offer, peer number 1 gives feedback in the left margin, and peer number 2 gives feedback in the right margin. Again, this is just trying to leverage the actual physical space of the paper, and margins are there, and margins are really, really useful. And finally, there's feedback loops. So feedback loops refer to this, that when you have provided feedback to students in whatever form it might be, require your students to summarize your feedback, articulate writing goals, and hand it back to you. In their next writing assignment then, their goals are formally assessed as part of the larger assignment. But I don't know if you've had these experiences. I certainly have. It's you spend all this time responding to student work, and then when it comes down to getting to giving the papers back, students look at their grade and they they discard or disregard the rest of your comments. So if we know that that's happening as kind of a norm, because we're teaching kids and that's what they do sometimes, we've got to build in a structure to help them not do that. And so doing this kind of feedback loop, it could just be an index card where students just summarize what they heard you say and what they're going to try to do differently next time, and then you collect those, hold on to them, and hold them to it when the next assignment comes around. So let's just think for a moment about taking it back to the classroom. Right? Take a few moments to think about how you might take some of these methods and ideas back to your practice, and write down one thing you plan to try in the next 2 weeks. If you're watching this video at a school with a partner, or you've got someone that you work closely with, turn to a partner and share your plan. Then give your partner your email address or your cell phone number and ask them to send you a note in 2 weeks asking how the method actually worked. And I would say go as far as like putting it in your calendar right now that you're going to ask somebody to check in with you on how this practice went. These are just some references that you might find useful as you're thinking about different approaches to offering feedback. And also on the left side are some more like kind of academic style articles, all very, very useful, and I think really worth a read. And then on the right are resources that you can Google or you can search online, and you'll find different tools and different places where there's some interesting conversations and tips going on in terms of writing and certainly giving feedback to writing. Well, I hope you enjoyed this brief presentation called Seeing Red. You can follow me on Twitter, connect with me on Facebook or on LinkedIn. You can learn more about what I'm up to at tomleonlynch.com. And thanks very much for taking the time to hear some of these ideas.